say we're good? Or no?
Yep, you're good.
Good, okay.
Wife's baby.
Good evening. Calling to order the meeting of the Southborough Zoning Board of Appeals for October 29th, 2024. On our agenda tonight, all we have is 120 Turnpike Road. We haven't been reading anything right yet. So, good evening. Now, there's some peer review stuff you probably want to talk about. Is there anything you wanted to say to begin with, or?
Just to introduce our team.
Yes.
And to say that we think we're close on wrapping this up.
Okay.
For the record, I'm Brian Charvel, here representing the applicant, FD 120 Turnpike LLC, joined by the usual suspects, Attorney Lou Levine, Attorney George Bonan, our principal, David Ferris, our civil engineer, James Tatro from Expedited Engineering, and then we have here tonight Mitch Maslenka, who's our wetland scientist from Goddard Consulting. This is, I think, the first hearing he's attended. But he's here to the extent you all hear from your wetlands peer reviewer. Mitch is able to respond to him. And that's it.
Okay, great, thank you. All right. So I think one of the things I believe we ought to do is, there's been peer review work, right, that's been going on. Can we start with the items that we had last time that needed to be addressed, what kind of progress we've made since then?
Yes.
Good?
Yep.
Great.
I think coming into the last hearing, we had just gotten the most recent memo update from LDC for civil review. And then a business day or two before that, we had also gotten that comment memo from the Conservation Commission.
Okay, right.
And in the meantime, especially Mr. Tatro, our engineer, has been responding to the points raised there.
Okay.
And we were at the point of having an updated site plan to share when this morning we got your wetlands peer reviewers memorandum.
Okay.
Which we understand everybody's doing their best, but it's hard. I think it's maybe this third time where day of hearing we've gotten a peer review memo.
Yeah.
And that makes it very hard in terms of our ability to react. And,
Understood.
And be prepared to have this be a productive hearing.
Okay, but at our last hearing, we had received something that day as well, right? And that was more about what these guys were doing, collaborating to try to address the open issues, correct?
That's right. Yep.
Okay. So I'm sorry, do we have the list here that we can?
So we have Mike from Land Design Collaborative,
Okay.
and we have Chris from Lucas Environmental.
Okay, all right. So if you could, I'm sorry, right. If you could, just what you had as items to be resolved, and then, what the status is of that, like how have you guys done in terms of working things out, if you could?
Sure.
Do you have it?
Yeah, I'll start, Mike Scott.
Yeah,
If you
can
could, yeah.
There. Thank you.
Mike Scott, Land Design Collaborative. Yeah, we did issue the first letter, I think, a month or two ago when I was at the first meeting. We issued a letter on October 8th, which was a follow-up to that. And then I met with James on the 16th, Mr. Tatro on the 16th in our office to go through the outstanding items here. And I would say that at that meeting, we either had a consensus on resolution to, I think, all but one or two items. And really, those other sort of remaining items were situations or cases where he was going to go back. It was related to some of the waivers and come back with a little more documentation. This was sort of the question that we had on a number of waivers where they were asking for a waiver from an entire bylaw or an entire section of a bylaw. So our conversation was, if you can cite a few examples of concerns you have with respect to the bylaw itself or portions of the bylaw, if you can explain why you feel you need a waiver from the bylaw. Just so you're understanding, they're not looking to have as one example that we discussed, the building doesn't need to meet a setback. You approve that, but then they move it into a setback, or they do something later on during construction that's, I'll call it egregious or shocking. but because it's such a broad-based waiver, you really didn't know what you were approving. So we were asking for some specificity, and I think that's one thing we were waiting for. The rest of the technical stuff, I would say we're all dotting i's, crossing t's, and number crunching, and between providing forms that will be required or calculations that will be required to get through the order of conditions, to receive an order of conditions, get past Mass DEP, they would have additional calculations, and that might result in a few plan changes, but there weren't any, I would call them deal killers. It was mostly, as I say, number crunching.
Okay,
So I have 15 items. I don't want to go through each of them unless you want me to. And again, they're not items that are deal killers, but there are things that we were expecting, either plan revisions or additional calculations.
okay, all right. So there's nothing in there that raises an alarm.
No, I think if I could, we had originally commented on the height of the building was one concern, but we understand that you've talked about that.
Well, we will discuss it tonight in the hearing.
So those types of things we've kind of moved beyond.
Yeah.
In other words, we didn't reiterate those points. They're clearly been made, and it
Yeah.
sounds as though you've discussed them. We understand that there was a variance, or you've discussed a variance on parking, so we sort of stepped back from parking. And then the intersection, I talked about site distance with James and acceleration lane distance, and we understand they're going to be through a Mass DOT permit at some point, and that there's a traffic review, so we sort of stepped back from that as well.
Right.
We raised our points. They're in the original letter. We think they're important, but we know other folks are going to be.
Right.
So again, we're on drainage at this point, and
Okay.
and I think it's number crunching.
Okay, so it's not anything that you're concerned about, it's just kind of getting through the details?
Yeah.
Like as you said, actually providing calculations that you would agree with?
Right, documentation that would be necessary at any commission hearing in the future. So I'm not sure if they filed with the commission, but, oh yeah, they have, because they received a letter. So documentation that would normally be part of a filing with the Conservation Commission is what we asked for.
And what's the outlook on actually getting all those things closed out, the documentation, the calculations, et cetera?
I mean, I would have to defer to them. It sounds like they were pretty close until, it sounds like there's some new questions on the wetlands, but.
Do you want to address that?
No, I mean,
Your
I
team?
agree, we're very, very close,
Okay,
aside from today's wetland concerns we got.
okay. All right. Did you have anything else, or?
No, again, it's a lot of it's, 2 points to the, right of the decimal point here that we're talking about, so.
Okay. I don't presently have the whole list in front of me, so I'm going by, the notes that you have and what you know are the concerns.
Yeah, so in our October 8th letter, we went through all the original comments, and most of them were resolved.
Okay.
Items that were left as partially resolved or unaddressed, that's what, Mr. Tatro and I sat down on a couple weeks ago. And again, we talked about each comment and how it might be responded to, or what additional data would be necessary for us to sign off. And that's why I'm saying, when we met that day, it felt like we had, concurred on virtually everything.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Where do we stand with the other peer reviews? With the other peer reviews? You said what just came in today? Wetlands. Yeah, okay, so not really going to have time.
Yeah,
It's a little hard to,
I looked at it
Caught
this
up on
afternoon,
it.
and I was like, oh, we got it like
I missed it.
8 hours.
I did
before
not
the
see it.
meeting.
Yeah,
Amazing.
I should
And
know.
I reviewed it then, but just kind of like going through this now.
Oh, your
Oh.
mic.
Sorry about that. Just that it came in earlier in the day as opposed to at the end of the day.
And to be frank about where our thinking lies on this, our position is we'd like the hearing to close tonight, subject to the open civil items that they're close on, as Mr. Scott said, and the wetlands items that can be resolved. So we think it could close, and the condition could be, reasonable resolution between us and your reviewers on civil and wetlands.
Okay,
I think it's not uncommon, Jay can speak to it, for a comprehensive permit to indicate that it's approved subject to conditions, hypothetically, that you meet the requirements of the memorandum of the wetlands peer reviewer, et cetera. And I think we're at that point right now.
So let me, and I was actually going to ask Mike that question. It seems like we're a little shy of that on the
Well,
wetland
no,
side.
but we don't
but-
take the same position, Jay, on the wetlands.
Right, so I wouldn't, I'm not sure closing is necessarily going to be possible yet on the wetlands issues. But Mike, as to the to-do items that you still have on your list, they could fit into one of two categories, I suppose. Things that you feel you need before we could turn this over to those kinds of things that could be imposed as a condition to shore up post-permit, or things that you still want to have now to satisfy yourself that that the project has, is consistent with local needs and addresses all the civil engineering issues that you'd like. So, I mean, that could be two different categories. So your thoughts on the remaining items, how substantive they are, what are I's that could be dotted post-permit that wouldn't potentially impact a board's decision on imposing conditions or making a decision otherwise?
So from our letter to address both the waiver requests and the sort of the technical compliance.
Right.
If we look at the technical compliance, I think all those things can be eventually, attained between, and I haven't seen the letter from Lucas, so I don't know where there's overlap on our part or perhaps some disagreement or maybe sending them in different directions. But from our perspective, the technical components, they're all stuff that we do every day as engineers. They can be resolved. The waivers, I would say that's more in the interest of the board to know, and I don't want to, give an opinion and say, I cited one example that was just something that we thought was a fairly substantial potential, ramification of approving just a wholesale waiver.
And what one was that again?
Well, that was just if you waive some section of a setback or some other sort of dimensional standard, and I think the parking's been resolved, but if there was something specific, and again, since nothing was laid out for us as to where they need the waiver, we don't know what their thought process was. Could they move the project around, or if you didn't, for instance, if you waive the height but you didn't set a specific height, something like that, where does that leave the board in the future if they come back with a set of plans for a building permit that's different than what was approved at this point? So there were a handful of waivers. There were some things we talked about specifically in the general bylaw. You have an earth removal or an earth hauling as one example. Are there fees associated with that? That's something that we said, if that was the sort of the gist of your general request, we just don't want to be subject to these sort of other parallel, if you want to call them that, sort of such as an earth removal where many communities would charge a fee per truck or they would establish some sort of condition.
We generally don't waive fees, but
But those were the kinds of things we thought were semi-harmless, if you will. But
Okay.
some of the other things seem like, if they're not defining why they need the waiver, then why are they asking for it, I guess was our contention.
right, so on those, for the board's benefit, if there's any vagueness there and there was a difference of opinion at the end of the day as to what you are willing to approve and the applicant is willing to live with, we might get into that kind of analysis where we need to narrow that down a little bit. I don't think anyone has suggested that that's on the table yet, but we also haven't started talking about those things either as a board. I know that, height has been a concern raised by folks, so maybe that becomes an issue. But in terms of basic civil stuff, the information that you have, there's nothing out there lurking that could impact, the feasibility of the layout out here.
Barring something in the conservation letter or
Right.
the conservation peer review, no, I think they're all, again, all the technical stuff I think can be resolved.
Okay. And have you arrived at a potential, not including the waivers per se, any, like a list of conditions or that the board may draw reference on as they're crafting their, or could you, when they're crafting their decision, that you would recommend from the engineering standpoint that we would essentially have a section on in the comp permit Like, this is the kind of data on stormwater calcs or whatever that we could put in the stormwater section?
Yeah, so far, we've listed a couple.
Okay.
As already in the first two letters. If there were things that were still left unresolved relative to filing another piece of, another calculation, we could identify that
Okay.
from our letter right now. If you were to in fact make it, a decision to close tonight and ask for a list, we could pull it out of our letter.
Okay.
But we've already made a few recommendations.
Okay.
Jay, Mr. Chairman, I just want to be straight up. The applicant, the extension, as I understand, for the public hearing to close is tonight.
Yep.
The applicant does not want to extend that,
Right.
okay? So our position tonight is the applicant, wants to close the hearing tonight, not going to grant a further extension. And we're suggesting what I said initially, that these areas that are,
No, I understood what you're saying, Lou.
Okay.
But I think we need to hear from wetlands as to whether or not the board has enough information, because the ramification, obviously, as you know, is if we're not ready, if we don't have enough information and we're compelled to close prematurely, the risk bears to your client.
I understand, and we've discussed that, but I also, alternatively, and I would say two things. We understand that, but alternatively, we take the risk if the board issues a decision and says, you shall comply, and I'm just paraphrasing, with the memorandum.
Or you shall not get an approval, and I'm not forecasting that
No,
either.
I understand, but in alternative, well, it's the board's choice, but the board can.
No, the choice would be yours as to whether or not you would extend, but what we're hearing is that you're not
And
going
obviously,
to.
we need the two alternatives. One alternative would be, the board could say, we have insufficient.
We understand the
other
alternative,
alternative
Lou.
would say- No,
We understand the alternatives.
No, I don't think the board does.
No,
The other alternative is the board says you shall comply, in this case, with the wetlands memorandum, period. You shall,
there's no compliance or not compliance. If we're lacking insufficient information
Okay.
to make that, then that's a different
oh, I disagree.
information.
I mean, the
Right.
board says
Well,
you shall.
why don't we hear on wetlands? Because when I read the report, not trying to put you on the spot, there were some glaring things that needed to get cleaned up,
Okay.
which didn't necessarily address feasibility or not. And I'm not suggesting that there are any glaring problems with the project, but the process is the process.
Okay. But we have our wetlands fellow here tonight, and the problem is that we had it 24 hours ago.
Right. That's a two-way street. So, right, understood.
All right. So, I mean, like I said earlier, I don't know, I haven't had a chance to see anything about with the wetlands peer review, so quite honestly, I'm not sure how we close with a peer review arriving today. I understood what you said, but
No,
Do we want to hear from our peer reviewer, maybe, just to give his report
Yes.
orally, too?
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Chris Lucas with Lucas Environmental. I'm a professional wetland scientist and registered professional soil scientist. I'll just start by saying sorry for the late memo. It's clearly created a little contention here, and I apologize for that. We had about 25 comments. A lot of them are housekeeping items, some minor things that are fairly standard for this scale of a project that should be easily addressed with some modifications. We did have some other concerns that we do think may require design modifications. I know LDC hasn't reviewed them, but based on some revisions to the wetland lines, it may require additional stormwater review by LDC, which could result in some changes. We originally, PWS from my firm was out on site in May to look at the wetland line, had some concerns with the delineation. Took some time with the applicant side. We went back out in August with Goddard Consulting. We met with, I believe it was Tom Schultz. Mitch was not available with schedules. We were trying to expedite the review. And we reviewed the line. There were some revisions agreed upon in the field. Wetland A is the wetland that's perched up high that ties to the catch basin. located west of the dog park and the leach field. There were some adjustments made to that line that were agreed, and some flags were hung in the field. That wetland, bordering vegetated wetland, connects to a catch basin, which eventually connects down to additional resources down gradient. The other resource area, which is not shown on the plans, which is our concern, is the pond, which is located pretty much north and east of the existing building on the property. That large pond was delineated by Goddard Consulting as Wetland C. They hung flags 1 through 39 on that area. There were several flags missing in the field that need to be addressed. That was part of the discussion. But that pond will have a 100-foot buffer zone associated with it. So that's not shown on the plans. And that puts the building, the parking, pretty much a substantial part of this project in the buffer zone. That would be before the Conservation Commission. Previously, before the Conservation Commission, was a project in 2019, Mass DEP file number 2901046, where that pond was approved as BVW. Goddard Consulting came in, they flagged it, identified it as BVW, Conservation Commission approved it. That order's expired, so the delineation is open for review with the NOI that's before them.
Excuse me, Chris?
Yes.
Just for the sake of me and some of the audience and anyone listening at home, if you can not use acronyms when
Sure.
possible.
Okay.
Just because, like, it's really a lot of data, and I'm literally just trying to keep up and being like, what is he referring to? So if
No
you
problem.
can, please don't use acronyms. And thank you.
Not a problem. So the pond was approved as a bordering vegetated wetland. It's a jurisdictional resource area under the Wetlands Protection Act that's overseen by the Conservation Commission and Mass DEP. The file number, there was a notice of intent filed with the Conservation Commission. That pond was approved as a wetland resource area, jurisdictional under the bylaw and the Wetlands Protection Act. There's a plan on record with the Conservation Commission dated May 16, 2019, showing that. Goddard Consultants' reports even indicate that wetland was flagged. There's a border report in the original application. There's one in the notice of intent. They've identified it. So we were surprised. We were expecting the September revised plans to show these resources. We were going to have to go back and review them, but at least the majority of the revisions we anticipated being on the plans. So we were surprised to not see wetland C on there, which would have given LDC opportunity to review this, specifically for the stormwater. There's also another wetland to the east of the building, wetland D, that was flagged by Goddard. We reviewed that, and I believe we're in general agreement. That wetland's right around the property line, but again, the buffer zone will extend in, the 100-foot buffer will extend into the work area. Additionally, in that area, there's another wetland that Goddard flagged, I-1 to 4. That's an isolated vegetated wetland, which could be jurisdictional under the bylaw, depending on how this board grants the waivers. But that would be a locally jurisdictional wetland. It wouldn't be a state jurisdictional under Mass DEP and the Wetland Protection Act. We also identified a seepage slope, which is located near the southeast corner of the existing parking lot where the building's proposed. It contained pretty significant hydric soils, wetland vegetation. Goddard indicated they were going to go back and take a second look at this.
And that's wetland A?
No, this is a wetland that's never been identified on the plans. It's near the southeast corner of the parking lot.
Okay. Thank you.
So that's not shown on a plan. Again, we believe. it-
Now I understand. Thank you.
So there's several resources. Wetland D is a bordering vegetated wetland. That would be jurisdictional, irregardless of the bylaw. Wetland I and the seepage slope appear to be locally jurisdictional, depending on how you issue the waivers. They would not be state jurisdictional, we don't believe.
Just, Laura's going to share
Okay.
the plan so we can more.
Thank you.
Point out, no, that'd be great. That's, it's hard to picture when you're speaking. Okay. So if you want to zoom out a little bit.
Yeah, that one's too tight.
It's going to show up. So you see the red line, the dot there? I've got this is wetland A. Yep, with a hand. This is wetland A, which is a seepage that connects to a catch basin, which follows a hydrologic, this culvert is a hydrologic connection, which connects to another wetland down here.
And
So
is
this-
that the one where the parking is in question?
No, this is up on the up gradient of the
Okay,
slope next to
just
the
trying-
dog park.
Trying to
Right.
remember and look at the notes as well.
And then it has a 100-foot buffer zone associated with it, and we have some comments on that. This is the large pond up here, which has been identified as wetland C. Can you see the red?
Oh, got it,
It doesn't always show up on the.
got it.
Yeah, so that, where that hand is,
Right there,
that's the pond, that's been identified by Goddard as wetland C.
Got it.
And then the southeast corner of the parking lot, the existing parking lot, which is roughly here, there's a seepage slope coming down the hillside here. We believe that's an isolated feature that could be locally jurisdictional. And then over on the property line side over here, they identified wetland D and wetland I. Wetland D is state jurisdictional, so regardless of any waivers you may grant, it's still jurisdictional under the state. And then there's a small isolated wetland adjacent to that in that general area over here, which could be locally jurisdictional, but would not be state jurisdictional. We expected that to be on the plan set in September. Particularly, this ponded area will have a 100-foot buffer, which would encompass a large portion of this. And one of the concerns we have with that is they have infiltration proposed in this area. My understanding of the stormwater, and we'll defer to LDC on this when the plans are revised, is you cannot put an infiltration structure within 50 feet of a wetland. That's my understanding of it. Again, we defer to your stormwater engineer on that, but if that's the case, you could be looking at a redesign of the stormwater system in this area, which is, it's likely doable, but again, if it's not permittable under the notice of intent, then you're looking at a redesign of this. And I'm not sure how that will work with the ZBA under this permit, but we are anticipating that this could result in a substantial change to the stormwater system here. The other concern we have near wetland A, which is up on the slope here, this is a bordering vegetated wetland. The wetlands on this site have a hydrologic connection to the Sudbury Reservoir, which means they're wetlands that border on a tributary to a surface water supply area. In this case, it's Reservoir number 3 in Framingham. Title V prohibits soil absorption systems within 100 feet of a wetland of this classification. And my understanding is you have a soil absorption system here and the sand filter associated with it. So again, we would defer to LDC on this, but I don't believe this can be cited within the 100-foot buffer zone to this wetland because it's classified as an outstanding resource water. So, and again, that's similar with infiltration structures having to be set back 50 feet in areas where the wetlands are classified as outstanding resource waters. So this is it's a stormwater issue tied to the wetlands. So we're raising it as a point that this needs further review by your stormwater engineer. And in these two areas, I do anticipate may need some redesign to be compliant with the Wetlands Protection Act. In briefly speaking with Mr. Scott prior to the hearing, we had some question about whether or not this pond was being used to attenuate stormwater. We were not clear on the application on that. If they're not using it for stormwater, it shouldn't be an issue if they are. There's additional concerns there, which, again, I'll defer to Mr. Scott on that. But I understand they may.
Could you repeat that statement for me?
So that if you have existing resource areas cannot be used to attenuate stormwater.
Correct.
We were not clear if that was being used.
Okay, that's what I wanted to.
Right, and
All right.
so,
Okay,
and speaking, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is with some additional backup, they're saying it's not being used for stormwater, but there's some additional backup that needs to be needed. So
okay,
if that's the case, then, we really have no further comment there on that.
okay.
We just wanted to make sure that was being addressed, because it's been an issue in this town on other projects, particularly before the commission. Some general comments we had, we're updating the buffer zone impacts once the wetlands were revised. I don't think that's a significant concern, but it'll need to be updated for the record, at least for the Conservation Commission. One other concern we had with wetland A, which is this wetland here being adjacent to here, this is a significant slope, steep topography. Our concern with all this regrading and work is ensuring that the hydrology to this wetland's not being altered, plus or minus. We don't want more water getting to this wetland. We don't want less getting to it based on the existing hydrology because it could impact the wetland. So we'd want to, for Conservation Commission purposes, they would need to document that they're having no adverse effect to this wetland. You know, there is a large buffer zone area around it that's being untouched. The main concern we had was ensuring that the hydrology is not being altered in such a way that they're going to either dry out the wetland so it's no longer functioning, or possibly create a situation where there's more water going to it, which could have adverse impacts to the wetland or the slope. Those are the major concerns we had. We have, you know, some general site plan comments about describing seating areas, adding locations of erosion control blankets and making sure they're free of plastic netting, showing construction phase stormwater basin stockpiles at construction entrance, updating the pollution prevention plan to be consistent with the NIPD's, the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, construction general permit. That's a construction oversight issue about timing. Most of these are minor changes that are, you know, fairly easy to address. Using straw mulch instead of hay, because hay has invasive seeds in there sometimes. Showing a connection from the building to the proposing septic leach field. One other question we had, we'd like to see, specifically with conservation when it gets there, this retaining wall. Looking at the old plan, it looks like the wetland comes right up into this area. Possibly into the wall, I'm not sure yet. We'll know once it's on the plan, is how they're going to build this wall without impacting the wetland. I mean, you've got a 6-foot-high block wall going in. They typically can be built, and it's just a matter of how much room you have there. We wanted some more detail identified to verify you're not going to impact the wetland while you're constructing it, because the erosion control line is right next to the base of the wall. So I know a lot of times you can work from up gradient and work your way in, but it's still very tight there, and it's close to the wetland. They have a snow storage area located here. Based on my experience working with the Conservation Commission, which we've been doing since 2010, they don't like snow storage right up against the wetland. So that would likely have to get relocated. DEP had several comments, technical comments, mostly on stormwater issues that will need to be addressed. And then we had several comments on the local bylaw, the main one being that everything we've discussed under the Wetland Protection Act is also applicable under the bylaw. Obviously, we would like to see all the buffer zones shown. I know this board may grant a waiver on the 20-foot, but the Conservation Commission likes to see the 20-foot, even if you're granting the waiver, just so everybody's clear on where that work is proposed, because the application indicates it only works.
Sorry, you mind just clarifying that for me again? The 20-foot?
The Conservation Commission has a 20-foot no-work zone, where they don't want to see any work in there.
Away from the wetlands.
From the wetland edge, correct, it's the first 20 feet. They like to see it on plans, even if the ZBA is going to grant a waiver. They'll want to see it on their plan just so they know what's going on in there. Right now, this is the only area they're indicating works within 20 feet, but obviously, the area adjacent to the entire pond's within the 20-foot. And I know that's a waiver that's been requested. That waiver should be updated to reflect all the work that's occurring in the 20-foot. So, but these are, I think, fairly minor comments. It's the original ones that we do think there could be some design changes that we have some concerns about. Again, I don't think there's anything here necessarily that will prevent this project from moving forward, but we do think there's some design constraints that need to be addressed.
Can I ask a couple questions? Absolutely. So the stormwater stuff I get, and if it causes a change and there's a ripple effect there, it seems to me like that's some important information. The Wetland Protection Act stuff, just knowing how 40B works, is going to be, largely this process gives way to the Wetland Protection Act stuff, because that's going to happen at the Concom. In terms of the local bylaw, there's obviously a previously developed site. So I look at the local bylaw, which has more stringent protection over isolated wetlands and buffer zones. And your thoughts on more qualitative impacts? Obviously, in the disturbed areas, there's not a lot of buffer zone function going on. They're already disturbed. But in terms of something like wetland A, obviously we're going to lose a whole little isolated wetland where you found the hydric soils, right? That's in the development envelope, right?
It appears so, yes.
Yeah. So that one will be just eradicated. So if it's performing any kind of qualitative wetland function, we're losing that, and that's something to be considered. I don't know how vital it is for this ecosystem out there, which connects to some other ecosystems out there. But in terms of buffer zone impacts, obviously the local bylaw regulates the buffer zone more stringently, and the local regulations go into that a little bit, and there's a lot of, information out there about protection of buffer zones. Are there any buffer zones on this plan that are being impacted that will be losing any kind of, vital buffer zone function as delineated under the local wetland bylaw, or do you just not know because that just hasn't been addressed yet? We're just working on the delineation so far.
We're still working on the delineation. The 20-foot buffer zone off the pond edge is partially disturbed where the existing parking is, but then there's also a fairly vegetated slope to the east of that that they're building in. So there is some value to that buffer zone. The Conservation Commission has the 20-foot because this commission feels that there's no adverse effect to the wetlands if you can stay outside 20 feet. Once you get within that zone, they feel that there's more potential for adverse effects. Other commissions have different buffers based on what
Sure.
they've experienced, but this commission feels the 20-foot should be preserved because it will avoid adverse effects to the wetland. But they also have a variance process that you can go through if you feel otherwise, and there's more flexibility. In my experience, I can't speak for the commission, but in my experience, there's been more flexibility on disturbed portions. So where the parking lot's within 20 feet, you have more flexibility to redevelop versus going into a more wooded area, undisturbed area within the 20-foot.
Right.
Is that
I'm just trying to focus on the board's limited jurisdiction
Right.
here, which is the more stringent areas. The stuff on the Wetland Protection Act, that's going to happen at the Concom, and their review is unaffected under the Wetlands Protection Act. Here, we're sitting as the Concom only with respect to the more stringent elements of the bylaw. So that's buffer zones and isolated stuff. Now, it also, everything you said, that's different than it impacting the stormwater and that soil absorption system, because those are fundamental design issues.
right?
But in terms of sitting in the shoes of the Concom and having to issue an ersatz order of conditions that either waives the entirety or significant chunks of buffer zone protection and 20-foot protection or not, the board has to weigh it from kind of that qualitative standpoint. And it seems like there's only a few areas on the site that really are getting into that. You mentioned the pond, maybe over by A, because there's some undisturbed areas over there, presently undisturbed.
Right. It's difficult to assess now because it's not shown on the plans.
Right.
They don't have the 20, so wetland A, there's clearly some work. It appears they're clipping the 20-foot here. It would be, if we could see the 20-foot, we'd have a better idea. But again, if this needs to be relocated out of here, that may resolve any issues with being in the 20-foot protective zone that the commission regulates. Near the pond, I'd be less concerned with this area versus the 20-foot over here,
Where it's presently,
where it's presently wooded. I know that the existing sand filter is located, towards up in this location, which we believe is just about 100 feet from the wetland edge. We'll know once the buffer zones are shown on there where the existing sand filter is. It may well have been cited where it is because of the 100-foot buffer in the pond previously. I don't know, I can't speak to that directly, but it appears to be about 100 feet away. But the focus would be that 20-foot zone, pulling back from the wetland if you can. That's the typical common practice with the Conservation Commission on sites that are more undeveloped.
and is that, and maybe this could be a question for Mike too, is that doable there if we wanted to, in the kind of more pure buffer zone areas there, pull out of that 20-foot, or would that cause design havoc here?
Based on where they have the stormwater and what they've got for the building, it would probably have an impact on the design that I don't see the applicant being pleased about. It'll likely change the design, having to pull back there. But again, I don't know exactly where the wetland edge is. I think it comes right up to that wall, possibly into where the wall is. Looking at the old plan from 2019, there's kind of the wetland seems to creep up a little bit in that location. So again, having it on the plans would be a lot easier. We could have a more quantitative discussion about these things and get a better idea of how much of the 20-foot, like the Conservation Commission would commonly, if there's a 20-foot buffer zone impact, they want to know how much of the buffer zone's on the site, how much are you impacting, and they can get an idea of, what the actual impact's going to be. Is it de minimis? So we're talking a few percent, 5%, 50%, 100%,
Right.
and then they can make a more informed decision. as to if they really feel it'll be an adverse impact. The other issue, the seepage slope near the building, and that other IVW, I don't know if that, my staff were on site, that other IVW may be outside the work area. If it is, great. If it's in the work area, the Conservation Commission regulates isolated wetlands on a case-by-case basis.
Well, that would be us here.
Right, so.
So I guess, I mean, it, is that, because I think that seepage slope there is going to disappear as part of this project. Is that, and what is the kind of function of, from a kind of this whole wetland system here? Is it performing anything? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot if you just don't know. I mean, we hate to lose anything that's performing a wetland function, obviously.
We haven't assessed the functions and values. Typically, in a peer review situation, we would ask Goddard Consultant, the applicant, to assess the functions and values, and then we would review it to make sure that we feel it's appropriate. So we would ask them to conduct a functions and values assessment. You know, what is this wetland functioning to protect groundwater, protect public water supplies? Is it functioning to, for storm damage protection, flood control, those type of things? So there's a whole set of interests under the Act, the Wetland Protection Act, that we would ask them to assess, and then we would review it and say, okay, we agree with you, and then say, okay, what are we losing by losing this wetland? And a wetland like that, if you're going to be losing that, we would ask, it wasn't being uncommon for the Conservation Commission. And I'm only telling you what the Conservation Commission would do, so this board is aware of what's common practice. If they took jurisdiction of it, then they might, again, the Conservation Commission, I can't speak for them, but it has been common where they might allow a small wetland like that to be filled with wetland replication. So if you're going to fill 1,000 square feet, say, as an example.
Is there anywhere on this site and do they do 1-to-1 replication?
Or
Or are they 2-to-1?
I believe it's 2-to-1.
Is there anywhere on this site where, like, if we were going to condition this to say, find a spot for, do it at least 1-to-1, if not 2-to-1, is there?
I would defer to Goddard, but you could probably find a place somewhere. It might not be exactly in that vicinity, but maybe there's something along the pond area between the parking lot or the work base of the wall, something like that. But, we'd want to see the square footage, figure that out, and then ask them to find a location, and we would verify the location if it's appropriate, so.
Do you know about how many square feet that seepage slope is, or not even?
I don't know. We would need it on the plan. Goddard indicated they were going to go back and take a look at it, and we've been waiting for a response. We haven't seen anything.
Okay.
So
But it's probably doable, some kind of replication, maybe.
I think it's potentially doable. I understand Goddard's here, but, these sites, usually you can find a way. Sometimes it's more challenging, it could be more costly, but it's typically doable.
Okay.
So,
Thanks. Thank you, David, for.
David, just have a couple questions.
Yep.
So this is more procedural. Chapter 40Bs have to only comply with the Wetlands Protection Act under state law at the Conservation Commission, correct?
So, yeah,
Yep.
we won't get into that, and there's a clear, and some of the more recent cases by the Housing Appeals Committee kind of make this clear that they only have to show that they generally can comply with the Wetland Protection Act.
Yep.
So what we would call a prima facie test, pretty low bar. But Concom is going to deal with all that stuff later, and they don't unaffected by 40B. So we are only concerning ourselves with those isolated wetlands, as well as the buffer zones, which they regulate a little more closely. And we should be concerned also if any of this impacts any of the stormwater design and other civil engineering issues that have been talked about by the civil engineering side of this.
Okay.
So,
And just more clear, but under the Wetlands, before you go, under the Wetlands Protection Act, this isolated wetland would not have jurisdiction,
if it's not connected to another wetland,
just for the board's clarity, just,
correct.
correct. I haven't seen it. My colleague did. It's a seepage. I don't believe it connects to any drainage. We would have to confirm that, but I'm fairly certain that would be isolated and would not be subject to the Wetland Protection Act.
Sorry, what was the area that you said was connected to the Framingham the reservoir?
Wetland A is connected through a drainage.
That's not, that's the one on the northeast,
That's on the southwest.
Southwest.
That's up on the hill next to the door.
up on the hill, okay, all right.
And-
But
and then
that's
the
not
pond.
that's not the seepage that you're talking about?
No, there's, wetland A is, that's wetland A, where he's
Yeah.
pointing. The pond they flagged as wetland C.
Wetland A is the one that's connected.
Correct. And the pond is connected. Wetland C is connected, and wetland D, which is located to the east near the property line, is also connected. It's a bordering vegetated wetland, which would have the classification of outstanding resource water, which is connected to the Sudbury. It's connected further down, but it does connect. Wetland I, which is an isolated wetland, is not connected as well. So there's two, that's also located to the east. I'm not exactly sure where it is on this, but it's located near the property line to the east. That's isolated. And then the seepage is isolated, we believe.
But the seepage was more in this area?
The seepage is, I believe, my colleague indicated to the southeast corner where the building is proposed. So it's somewhere in this vicinity here.
And then other quick questions, D is not on the property, but buffer, the 100-foot buffer zone would be within the property.
The 100-foot buffer zone appears to extend into the property. We're not sure where wetland D is exactly. We believe it's near the property line. It could be on it or just adjacent to it. We're not sure until it's shown, but it's been flagged.
Yep.
These things have been delineated in the field. The seepage hasn't, but everything else has, so it would have been helpful having this on the plan in September. I think we'd be having a more involved discussion tonight on these issues.
And just for clarity, the pond was originally, it is a man-made pond, but because of the passage of time and being after 1990, is technically now a wetland, but it is a man-made pond originally with the original development.
I don't know the full history on this.
Or I guess the question might be to the developer or the proponent as well, just for clarity, because, I mean, it looks like it's a detention pond that was built, but I get that it's BVW, so I'm not suggesting it's not, but I was just curious, that's not an original wetland, so.
We're not sure. So I know the Conservation Commission in their letter indicated that it was designed and permitted in 1983, which is well before 1996, which is the criteria for it to be jurisdictional or not. Two things we look at, that was it created in a wetland area? We don't know. We haven't done research on that. Typically, if an applicant comes before us with a commission and they're calling it BVW, we don't spend the time and money to check into the drainage. If they're saying it's wet, if they say it's not, then we'll look into it, as we've done for other projects in the town.
Okay.
But yeah, per the Conservation Commission, it does appear that way. We haven't been asked to review that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All set, Doug?
If I may, Chris mentioned
Yes.
3 things related to stormwater, so while they're still fresh in my head. There was a question about whether the pond was used for storage or for attenuation of storm flows. Does not appear that's the case from the information that's been provided. I had that conversation during our meeting with Mr. Tatro, so I think they're not looking to use that wetland area for volumetric attenuation, which would be prohibited if it were a wetland. There was a question about, that Chris brought up, whether or not the recharge of stormwater could occur within 50 feet of a wetland area. I had this conversation with Mr. Tatro during our meeting. It was in our letter. DEP's policy, as we understand it, is that infiltration may not occur within 50 feet of a wetland area. We understood that the pond was a wetland. We weren't aware that there was going to be an additional area of wetland to the south or closer to the parking. So it's likely that some of the area where the porous pavers are proposed would constitute infiltration within 50 feet. Quite a bit of that area is already disturbed, so this would be considered a redevelopment type project. There are relaxations on standards in that instance. Other portions of the site are not necessarily redevelopment. The areas that are beyond the parking, I guess that's a question for the Conservation Commission to iron out. My personal opinion is it could go either way. There's clearly been disturbance. The question is whether or not that has remedied itself over time, or and it's in a naturalized state, or not. If it's not in a naturalized state, I would consider that not. I would allow for redevelopment there if it were to, in my opinion. So that's an open question. When I mentioned that these types of things could be resolved, I think that there's still room to make the drainage system work. I believe that the analysis that was done was conservative and not favorable to the applicant, if you will. They took a conservative approach relative to stormwater volume. I think there's an ability to shrink some of what they've done and still comply. But we would need to see that, those numbers. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention was the sand filters location. We had this conversation, it's in our letter. We know that the state doesn't, the DEP regulations do not allow a sand filter within a buffer zone. There's a question about this as an ORW and whether that can be within 200 feet as well. So we're just, it was an open item. My understanding was that that was something they knew they had to discuss with the Board of Health and or the DEP as the time moved forward. But these items were, listed in our original letter and they remained in our most recent letter. So if there is a change to the wetland line or additional wetland resources that would preclude infiltration in areas that are currently shown, then that would likely require redesign. But as I mentioned, I think their system is over-designed in some respects. And again, one of the commitments and during our meeting on the 16th was with Mr. Tatra was that we would see revised or enhanced cross-sectional views of the infiltration system, so we'd have a better understanding of where the groundwater levels were located relative to the parking lot or the proposed parking lot, because they performed some additional test bits and they had additional data that wasn't already on the plans. So some of these technical things we expected to work out, and I'll say my optimism that they could be resolved was in part based on that additional data that was going to be forthcoming, as well as my first thought was they've over-designed in some regard. So for what it's worth, just wanted to get that out of my head.
Thank you.
Do you think that are you referring to like the pollution prevention? Is that what you're referring?
I'm talking about the porous pavers that are being used for stormwater mitigation on the site, specifically. There were a number of comments that conservation had, and our attitude here is if he's going to revise or they're going to revise a pollution prevention plan or an erosion and sedimentation control plan, it ought to be in line with the Conservation Commission, but those are other things that are simple to do. It's the normal course.
Yes, you may.
I'm curious why I don't think this is for you, but why the wetlands are not included on the most recent plans. And then obviously, if also your peer reviewer could explain, kind of answer all the issues we just heard about and what the solutions could be. It sounds good to me.
Hello, this is Mitch Maslanka, wetland scientist with Goddard Consulting. So to answer your question about why the wetlands have not been shown completely on the plan is because we had a surveyor who has to go to the site and locate my flags and put them on the site plan. So that did take some time to gather those coordinates so that we could put those on the site plans. We do have those coordinates now. We received them last week, so I needed to take some time to review them myself and then make sure they're accurate per what they picked up for data, and then we will provide that on the next set of site plans for you. And then want to repeat your second question?
Just kind of a general response to the potential issues, how you would address them, or if you see them as an issue or not.
Sure, yeah. So typically, I actually receive a lot of memorandums from Lucas Environmental, so we're very used to providing response memorandums back. Basically, we will provide an updated site plan showing some plan revisions like the wetland boundary lines, any other labels to flags that we need to adjust. We'll put those on the site plans and we'll include them in a memo. Some of the comments that were mentioned, some additional flags for the A series will be added to the plan, connecting to the catch basin on the slope, so that one won't be an issue. The D series wetland will be shown on the plans, like Chris had mentioned. There was no disagreement with that wetland boundary, so we'll have the wetland flags on there with the buffer zones, the 20 and the 100. The isolated vegetated wetland, the I series one, that one will also be shown on the plan. We do have the data for those. I did go to the site to visit that small isolated seepage area that Chris had mentioned. Just visually, it's probably the size of maybe two of those tables there. So not a huge area. As far as function and values go for that area, it is on a slope and functions very much like the rest of the upland slope. So as far as replication goes, we'd want to replicate an isolated vegetated wetland similar to that, which is you want to match the same wetland functions and values that you're going to fill and replicate those elsewhere. And I do believe there is room on site to do that. So let's see what else we got. As for the ponds, so the ponds, we are collecting additional evidence that has become available over time. For those, they might actually be detention basins, designed back in 1983 when Chris alluded to them being constructed as ponds. They may actually have been detention basins used for stormwater management. And if that's the case and they've been maintained after 1996, improved, if they've been improved after 1996, then they would still be considered stormwater systems and not a regulated resource area under the Wetlands Protection Act. So that is something that we have been working to compile those documents and then put together a memo for Chris to review, because as he mentioned, he's not going to go and do that for, if the wetland scientist told him that this was Bank of Pond, he's going to, agree. And but over time, since the initial wetland delineation was conducted, more information has become available so that we might, instead of considering them ponds and wetland resource areas, they'll be detention basins or detention ponds, stormwater management systems. So we are compiling that evidence currently. I believe that's all I can really comment on for now. I defer other questions probably to James in terms of the stormwater, or not the stormwater, the soil absorption systems and such.
I think I just have one more question. I'm not sure you addressed it. There was that 20-foot work buffer.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you see as an issue, or are you just saying it's not going to be an issue?
I'm James Tatro from Expedited Engineering, and I can tell you if it's agreed that per 310 CMR 10.022C, that's the section of the regulations that says if a pond, if a detention basin existed before November 1996 and was not altered or improved, that it could be considered a wetland resource area, again, if it is agreed, because it has been actually improved, and we'll bring the information, that is a detention, that is really one detention basin. If that is the case, then we believe we will be able to say that we are not working within 20 feet of any wetlands, with the single possible exception of the slope area that was mentioned, that's at the southeast corner of the existing parking lot.
And if it does happen to be a pond, then the only presently undeveloped, there's only a small portion of presently undeveloped area where you'd get into the 20?
Correct. Only in the area immediately sort of extending
on the
the boundary
right
of the
close.
parking lot further to the east, where we'd be a similar distance from the pond to the existing parking area.
So in that we don't know yet whether or not it's subject to jurisdiction or not, is there an ability to improve that area, even if we did, like if we just gave a post-permit condition and said, get out of the 20 in undisturbed portions of 20-foot buffer? Could that be done without a significant change, just in that area, just where it's not the previously developed area?
It would be, I mean, it's hard to exactly quantify, how much of it.
Has it been quantified, how much?
I mean, how
buffer?
significant, whether that's a quote significant change or not.
Right.
It is some change. I mean, but And again, I would note that there's existing parking area closer to that pond right now than most of what we're talking about.
Right, well, I mean, we can't fix what, we're not going to try and reclaim what was already lost, but in terms of, if the board, we haven't had that deliberation yet, said if it hasn't been disturbed yet, stay 20 feet away from it.
Sure, and we were already making steps toward that regard. For instance, in my meeting with Mr. Scott and his colleague Wayne Bellick at his office, they talked about moving, showed a discharge from the roof of the building to a point off of that, I'm going to say detention basin. And we were pushed, could you move that away such that you already have one stone swale leading toward it? Could you bring that discharge to that same point so that there's only one intrusion, if you will, close to that pond, whatever its status is? And we had actually already done that on the plans.
When do you expect to have your research done on whether it's a pond or a unregulated old detention?
I think it is pretty much done because we've gone through the town's files at the Board of Health and the Building Department and looked at other things. We found the old 1983 Marlboro USGS quad map showing the stream and showing what was on site, and we've got pictures from historic aerials and other things. There were no ponds there before the construction of that development in 1984, actually.
I mean, I'm just trying to avoid a situation where we're doing a whole bunch of ifs this, then that, in a complex web of conditions. I'd rather be more cut and dry. Obviously, we have a timing issue here tonight, so we're going to have to do with whatever we can do with it. But it's hard to make those decisions while there's still some uncertainty out there on these things.
Jay, if I may, can you just opine as to whether, I think you have in a general sense, can you opine as to whether it is a wetland or not? I mean, definitively?
Again, before Chris and Lucas Environmental had presented their letter, we had a letter a week or so before that from the Conservation Commission, who raised that same issue. And at that time, we looked into, okay, what was the status of this? How was it created? What was there before? And again, we found, that these ponds were created apparently. First one of them in 1984, and the second, I believe, a few years later when the second building was done. And we found, and again, we talked with staff at Ferris Development, and looking at the regulation and the requirement that pond had to have been altered or improved. If it existed before November 1996, it had to have been altered or improved after that time to still maintain status as a detention basin. And I asked staff at Ferris, what have you guys done? And they said, well, we armored a whole bunch of the slope area because we thought...
It would have to have been a detention basin before 85, though, right?
If it was a detention basin before 1996, and then after that time, November 1996...
So 96 is the date,
Yeah.
There's not a...
Yeah.
Okay.
It's in 310...
No, I'm
They cited, and I had no idea of that particular provision of the regulations. We had to look it up.
I mean, I'm familiar with it. I thought there was a 1985 date that was important too, but it's 96.
I don't think so.
Okay.
So if it was improved after installation, it still keeps its character as a detention pond if it's before 1996?
If it was originated before 1996 and something after 1996 was done that improved it or altered it, and you could debate what exactly altered is, that would qualify as on the positive side, then yes, it would. The regulation says it would maintain its status as a detention basin.
So no definition on altered. It's really small, but so
So-
it's probably been altered. Maybe that's what I would think.
Yeah, could you definitively say it's been altered since 1996?
I would definitively say it's been improved.
Improved.
In that Ferris staff brought in stone and armored some of the slopes that they were, I guess, looking at and wondered, is that really in great shape there? And
They just did it on their own, or was it part of a permitting process?
they did it at the time. I know that they had contacted Melissa at the Conservation Commission
Okay,
agent.
so there was some oversight. These guys weren't just dumping rocks.
It wasn't a notice of intent filed, but they Michael Ferris contacted Melissa, and we were asking about, is it okay to cut here? And I don't remember if she also came out and looked at it or was just sent pictures, and they talked about
There
what.
was no RDA or anything?
There is not an RDA, but we actually were digging up the receipts for the stonework and to be able to present it and say, we're not just saying this, it is something.
No, but so it seems like it may fit the profile, but not quite definitive yet, right?
Correct. It's we had just responded on our side to the Conservation Commission's own letter, which again covered much of the same matters that Chris raised. And we were getting ready to, we were in fact going to try and have a set of plans in at least yesterday. And things of course came up but then we also got the letter from Lucas Environmental and we said, well, wait a minute, there's no point in sending in a plan that might still not address some of these issues right before this meeting. So I apologize for that.
So you think you can definitively say that it was disturbed after 1996? How confident are you that it was created as a detention pond prior to that?
Absolutely, it's shown as such on the. There were.
So you have one of the two you feel really confident.
There was well, it's really one detention basin. They're connected by.
No, I meant one of the two conditions. You said it had to.
Okay. Yes. Again, the regulations is altered or improved. I would say that it was improved. I don't know what exactly they would.
Whatever altered or improved means.
Count as altered. Maybe they're counting somebody.
It could have been an alteration or an improvement if they were kind of in more of a amateur way putting rocks in, right?
Theoretically, somebody could expand a detention basin if they expanded a parking lot and needed to have greater storage capacity. They could do that.
I'm not putting a value judgment on it. I'm just saying
Yeah.
you can't really quite characterize it from here as either an alteration or an improvement. They did something to the pond post 96.
I would definitely say it is an improvement because they improve the stability of the existing slopes.
All right, well, that's helpful.
Yeah.
It'd be great if you guys could submit that sooner rather than later, just
Sure.
what information you have on that, because I think that would be helpful, for the board.
Sure.
And then just two quick follow-up questions. Are you guys within the 20-foot buffer zone on the Series A? I know you guys are pretty close there, or are you outside of that?
And Chris is
wanted-
right. It looks like it's right up to it.
Yeah.
We believe we stayed just outside of it.
And then what about the sand filter distance to the A Series? Because it's really a Wetlands Protection Act,
Well, we've looked at that. We had some more discussion about that. If need be, we could actually move that sand filter to the west of the 100-foot buffer zone. We were really just sort of concentrating all the work in one area rather than working to the east of the buffer zone with the septic system and then again to the west. We were trying to sort of concentrate it all to one side. But if we could not agree that the sand filter could be placed where proposed, we could put it near the westerly property line of the site and be beyond the 100-foot buffer zone.
Would we then, in that instance, be kind of modifying the 6.2 acres back there?
We would end up, yeah, exactly.
Making like a tooth out of it on that side more?
Very good. You drew the inference right away. Yeah. But yeah, we would be taking essentially that rectangle of area out from the east side of
We'd
the.
get more contiguous
west.
area over on that side, closer to the conservation maybe, but
Yeah.
lose a little bit.
It was a little bit by the sort of the farthest point on the site from the path and the other land, yes.
Okay, all right.
You can find a home for it, basically.
Yes.
Okay.
Just now that you mentioned it, Jay, moving, does that at all help that corner that we were so concerned about with the dog park, or that really doesn't have any impact?
No, it's not the nearest thing to that,
Okay.
to that corner.
It's on the western side of that chunk out of the,
It's a little further north toward the existing parking
Okay,
area and
yeah.
on the west.
The dog park area is actually
Right.
further south of that, right?
Yep.
So, okay. Just being optimistic, sorry. Anybody else have any questions? Paul? Any? All right. So, I don't know, Jay, your opinion, what they're asking for.
I mean,
Feels like this, like you said, it's a lot of conditions to try to thread that needle.
yeah, I mean, I've been keeping track. It's really, if the applicant is still dead set on closing, it would be kind of over my recommendation, certainly, in terms of getting a more fulsome set of information. To the extent that they did, we'd pick this up in deliberations. I've been making a short list of conditions to address all the questions that Chris raised, and to then tie that into how final stormwater plans are designed too, and make sure that that goes into multiple post-permit, if it comes to that. I wouldn't want to, I think if they want to close, which I don't recommend, but if they want to close, then I think when we get back together again in 20 or 30 days to deliberate on this and come to a decision, then we're going to have to think about that. We can't take any more information, all this good information that we just heard about as to whether or not it's a pond or a detention basin, whether or not it's been altered or improved, is not something we'd be able to consider at that point.
Well, what's the meeting again, 20 to 30 days?
So when we close, we've got 40 days to make a decision, and then we've got 14 days following that to file the decision. I try and wrap everything up as much as I can in 40 days. So we get, at any point in time in that 40 days, we can get back together and start talking about what we think. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't other issues too that we've talked about. There's, height of building, there's the 6.2 acres, there's all kinds of other things factoring into what you may or may not decide. But if we get to an approval, there's certainly going to be a lot of conditions in this one, because there's a lot of unknowns still. From my perspective, I think Mike has been able to resolve a lot of the stormwater stuff, but the wetland side still seems.
Yeah, I would agree. There seems like there's an awful lot.
Yeah.
So, just in the context of public meetings, by closing the meeting, that means we're not really taking any more information from the
Zero.
applicant.
I mean, they could.
But we can consult
talk
with
to
the peer.
them and say, would you accept this condition, or?
Yeah.
But there couldn't be any more factual information coming in at all. So the delineations on the plans that might indicate where the undisturbed 20 feet is, and those kinds of things, that isolated seepage thing that isn't that big, but still it'd be helpful to know how many square feet it is. Because if you just do decide to replicate it, which is pretty common and accepted practice, then that's gonna just be part of it. So, I mean, it's all doable. It's just gets a little more complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe I just want to make sure I get really clear, and maybe the members of the board, on what we feel like, and I think you touched on them, the things that they're going through, either, through the Concon, or they have to comply with the Wetlands Act. Like, obviously, I mean, those things.
I mean, most of the wetland issues are going to get picked up by the Concom.
Yeah.
I tried to focus, and Chris was really helpful, on the areas of concern that we have, that we can regulate under the local wetland bylaw. I don't think it's worth our time, given where all the cases are, and getting into what the Concom's going to get into. They've clearly made a prima facie case that this is doable. That's all they have to do. I think they're going to have to do a bit of work, and I think, I don't have a crystal ball, but my guess is the Concom's going to require maybe some changes, and that'll be maybe minor or insubstantial changes back here. But that's not atypical either.
Okay. All right.
Hi, David Ferris, 118 Turnpike, the applicant in the process. I just was listening and wanted to start with a couple of remarks. First, thanking the board for the constructive dialogue we've had to date. I really have enjoyed working with everybody on this board, and feel very, very strongly that it's been a very productive, good faith back and forth on all the changes. And I think one of the challenges we run into as a development company is standing behind who we are as a company and what we mean to a community. And I think this is one of these cases where we're very close with a lot of the final details that you need to be able to approve a project, but there is still some open things. And I was pretty resolute, as were the attorneys prior to the meeting, to closing it tonight. But in listening to both sides, ours and the wetland scientists, I'd like to ask the board to consider maybe a hybrid, which is like, we're trying to make a lot of goodwill deposits in the community. I think this location generically is much better received in the community than where we originally cited it. And the money that we put into redesigning this, maybe we'd have to redesign a little bit more. But if the consultants on their side and got direction from you that in the next week they could sit down with ours and get in a room and look at what really works, and we could put it out a 2-week period or something where we could get at least a little more dialogue to close the gap on some of these issues, I'd be willing to do that as an applicant. It's just, I had sort of said in an open meeting, if we're going to make this, donation, I'd really like to get it done by year end. And I don't need to get necessarily past the appeal period, because I feel like this is a good faith community that I've lived in for 50 years, but I just want certainty. And I just want to, this is what I would call our first trade together, like with the ZBA, of their pending stuff with you guys. So the last thing I want to do as an applicant is appear unreasonable and push something that's not quite ripe for decision. So what I would just say is, to the extent, either the chair or a subgroup of the committee could check in with the environmental guys to make sure this is tracking, and just even if it's a email that kind of updates every couple of days where we're at and finalizing. Our engineer will be readily available to do that, and Mr. Goddard's consultants, and he's a great guy and been very receptive, would be certainly willing to do that. I just would step back and say, I think, we all kind of knew the pond was there. Side note, I was texting the attorney saying, I actually swam in the pond. I don't know if that counts, over a lost bet at a company party out by that fire pit, which was a bad bet on my part. And honestly, I smelled for about a week after that. But in any event, no, we did get Melissa's consent and blessing, town council, when we were talking about changing some of the topography around there, because we were stocking it with trout to take out some brush and limbs so kids could cast there, and that was on my Southborough page, so it's on public record, what we did and why we did it. And we've been doing it every year. We put about 175 pounds of brook, brown, and rainbow trout in there each year, and we invite kids to fish them out. But in any event, it is really like a stormwater basin, and we're not a JV player. We know the importance of maintaining that, title of that property for this very reason. So I just would say that if you think that would work, I want to be accommodative and try to make it.
So just to be clear, you're saying if we can sort of monitor, them trying to iron out a lot of these things?
Yeah, I think they get 90% of this done in a week or two.
So that you would be willing to?
Yeah, we would do that, because I feel like we have other pending business, and we're a local company, and I don't want to be an unreasonable guy with a lot of the community, and I feel like this could get, I got to be totally transparent. This is not a very big project. We're well invested in Southborough already, and this is 50 some odd units, but it's been a lot of time, and it's been I think it's been received well by some and not by others. And so at some point we kind of weigh, is this really worth it from a reputation standpoint?
So, yeah, and I appreciate you doing that. I think it has been pretty cooperative. I think the board recognizes what you've done. So I know, I don't want to speak for the board, but I think we would probably appreciate that, being able to push it out.
We're tentatively scheduled, Dave, for the 13th.
Of November.
Yeah, for 250, and
maybe we could
query
wrap it up
whether or
then.
not there's going to be a lot there.
Yeah.
There were one issue left here.
Let's do that. I think that works for everybody.
Okay. I think the process will benefit. There'd be a much cleaner set of
ideas.
Conditions.
Yeah. It's just, from our standpoint, we kind of all in the room knew the pond was there, and we all kind of, and frankly, I give credit sometimes where credit's due. The planning board chair had the idea originally to move the building off of that down to the parking lot. And, I thought it was a good idea. The parking garage was supposed to be there, and I think it makes a lot more sense and it accomplishes a lot. And I just want to share one thing that I've gotten consistent feedback from friends and community members in town, and I guess I didn't fully appreciate it until we did a site walk at 352, how important elevator accessed apartments are in Southborough right now. You know, I have a young man, he's now my age, but a guy who has a disabled child who wanted to come tonight and talk about it. And I know, you know, I've heard from people like Bonnie Faniff and other meetings about the wait list at Madison Place for first floor units. And I really do think that the height, although not ideal, that was an early give that we gave on the 6 stories to 5. And then on the 5, we really stepped it back. And so I think if we were probably a more strategic Machiavellian firm, we would have waited till the last minute to do that. But we just wanted to be sort of open about it. And I think that if you look in town, that's really creating a hardship for a lot of people that already have a lot of hardships, their age, their disability, et cetera. So I think that's a pretty relevant factor around that issue. Not to open another whole can of worms late in the night, but I just did want to raise that.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. I'm actually going to suggest to take a 5-minute recess for my own personal reasons. Are we okay with that?
I'm okay with that.
Take 5-minute recess?
You do that tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay.
Gotta unmute, hold on. Okay, you're good.
4 years of appeal.
Oh, yeah, no.
Okay, we're back. I don't think that matters a whole lot, but for the public record, I just want to say I'm familiar with Mr. Mislanka. He's actually my wife's first cousin's son, so I'm familiar with him. Neither of us have much to benefit from here, other than this is his job. So just so you're aware of it. All right, Doris?
I just want to say I appreciate what Mr. Ferris had to say to the board. Thank you very much. I just wanted to take a step back, and I came in to close the hearing, and I got a really positive sense that both Goddard and Lucas, they've worked together in the past. I don't know them personally. I have no relationship whatsoever. And they gave me a very strong sense that they're going to be able to work through the problems, whether they're moving the sand filter. We've got 3 buffer zones that maybe 100 feet or 20 feet, and then we got the pond going on. So I'm not necessarily opposed to closing the hearing. That's all I have to say. So I'm not really opposed to it, but I'd like to hear from the other board members.
I mean, my feeling is that to close it where we don't really have the final documentation, I would like to see the things that they talked about being delineated. I would really appreciate seeing them.
No, I appreciate that. So I probably have one legal process question related to that. I clearly heard we can't take any more facts or findings in before the next, is it 45 days?
Yeah. If we close.
If we close.
Yeah, should we close? If we close, we close. We're going to have to write a condition. Say we had to write a condition. So we can't use any logistic that we receive on the site plan or anything that comes in writing those conditions. It's more of a procedural question.
No, so we can get additional, let's just say we wanted to do this tonight. We would say, hey, listen, we need this plan. And so there would be the requested waivers, and then we would get like additional updated site plan. We would get some of the issues addressed. But we couldn't then go back and ask those engineers questions and say, hey, what about this or what about that?
Okay, but what we would get, we'd get updated notes from each of the 2 engineering companies.
No, not if you close,
Not if we
nothing.
close, we would get an updated
No
plan.
No, you wouldn't,
Oh, that was
nothing.
my understanding, that was. gonna be
The
part of
curtain comes down.
it. Okay.
Okay, so we get the site plan and we'd be on our own to read it. We wouldn't get a site plan.
So it would be.
You couldn't, I mean, to the extent it exists in the universe, there's no, prohibition against you reviewing it, but you can't use that data or reference that data.
So we can only condition on anything we want to condition on is in the facts and circumstances we have this night.
Correct.
All right, so that's pretty clear then. Yeah, I need a plan.
You think?
Would be mildly helpful.
Okay, anybody else?
The only thing I would ask, and we talked about this before, I mean, I think there still seems to be some lack of clarity on the waivers. There's still some blanket waivers. Anything you guys could do to limit that as much as possible, just to help us, would be really appreciated.
That's true.
Otherwise, we're going to have to struggle, through them.
Yes, and looking at it since the last meeting, we found that some of those so-called blanket waivers, we've been able to eliminate.
Yeah.
And so we have a redlined, updated waivers list ready to submit. That
Okay.
If this does get continued, we will submit it
Yeah,
tomorrow morning.
that would be great, because again, it's gotten more and more clarity as we've gone through it, but there's still, it's just to help us, right? I mean, otherwise, I would recommend that you don't necessarily leave it to us, because it'll be torturous, I think, on our side. So more clarity is great. And I do appreciate the 2-week extension. I do think it'd be great to take the 2-week extension and just get the information. I do think we're very close on a lot of things, but I wouldn't want to necessarily go beyond that. I mean, I think we're going to have everything we need within, at that point, we should have everything we need to at least go forward, so, my
Sharon,
perspective.
If the applicant is willing to grant a 2-week extension, with the caveat that the engineers or the peer review people will be able to speak, and there'll be updates either through the chair or the secretary, so we just don't come back on the 13th.
Right.
Yeah, and if I can, to the professionals here, I don't want to get this stuff the day of. Like, I love you, I appreciate it, but,
Careful,
you know.
I'm an engineer too.
yeah. It's just one of the, I'm an attorney, so it's like everybody hates me, but at the same time, like, you
No,
know.
but, look, whatever's
Yeah.
happened has happened. But we've-
Right.
we've-
That's all I'm
Sorry.
asking. No, I don't care about that. I'm just saying,
Whatever's happened has happened.
What, I'm sorry, are you asking for something specifically right now, Lou,
Well,
or?
I'm saying is, the applicant is willing to give the
Yeah,
extension. If the
okay,
board- If
yeah.
the board wants to, vote to accept it,
You just want to know that they are allowed to talk to each other.
not only allow that they will, and that they will keep the chairman or the secretary aware.
I mean, I can't compel Chris to talk to anyone, but they certainly have the green light and are encouraged to
And
talk to
You
each
mentioned
other.
that at the first hearing, when we
Yeah.
discussed it. I understand that, but that they will, and that they will keep the board on a couple of days basis aware
Yeah.
of what's going on, so we don't get to the next hearing and nothing really gets accomplished.
I would not, myself, if the board agrees, I would not have a problem, being in some of their conversations or updates if that's something they agree to. I won't be opposed to it, is all I'm saying.
No, and we're all saying the same thing. So
Okay.
we're willing to give you the extension, board, votes to accept it. We'll give you a letter tomorrow.
Okay.
Confirming, correct, Brian?
Correct.
All right, and that the peer review people will coordinate with our people. And obviously, if we let down, we let down. And if we don't let down, like Mr. Robbins indicate, then hopefully you won't see something,
Okay.
the day of the meeting.
We would have been a lot further on the meeting tonight had we had,
So would we.
Yeah.
and everybody would. But
So-
still, really, if everyone could, like, not even 2 days, it's a lot to absorb, yeah, it's a lot to absorb, and then we have the different committees.
We appreciate your
Yeah,
understanding.
yeah.
So can the board consider that?
I think we will consider, but before, I just would like to say, there are a couple of things that we've sort of been not discussing that I do want to bring
Okay.
up tonight, okay? I'm not,
No, go ahead.
I'm just saying, let's get through some of these other things, and then I think we're in agreement that we want to do that generally. Jamie, did you have something?
Oh, no, I was just, I originally was thinking what Doris was thinking, where it's like, if they could work things out, I could see a path where we could close tonight, but hearing that we would be completely cut off if we made
Yeah,
a decision.
doesn't
I
seem like
agree
a
with
great
the
idea.
2 weeks.
Yeah, the cutoff took my good idea
Yeah.
away. That's okay, so I'm willing to extend
Okay.
if it needs to be said.
Amy?
And for what it's worth, I mean, I thought tonight was pretty good, and it does sound like we're closer than I even thought, so I think it would be very prudent to take the 2-week extension and have some of those things ironed out further and explained further and
Okay,
and rediscuss it in 2 weeks.
all right, good. Thanks, Paul. Mimi?
Mimi Latrell, Chair of the Planning Board. The 6.2 acres that is a condition of a approved site plan, the layout of that 6.2 acres does not meet that condition. It has a drainage swale in it, and it's got all kinds of grading, and it's been denuded, and that is not what the 6.2 acres was donated as open space, and that does not meet that definition. And I can't imagine the Conservation Commission wanting to take land with somebody else's drainage swale in it. That makes no sense at all.
Right.
So that, and then I have subdivision questions. There's a preliminary subdivision, but it only shows lot lines for 2 lots, but it lists 3. I think it would be helpful knowing what the lot lines on all 3 lots of that subdivision are. And has the Board of Health weighed in? Because per statute, the Board of Health, you shall take the conditions or the recommendations of a Board of Health for a subdivision. So I don't know if they've weighed in or not. And the last question, I think it was the last meeting, the proponent said they had spoken with the superintendent of schools, and either the bus will be at Route 9 or it will come down that access way. But if it's on Route 9, there's no sidewalk, so how are kids going to get down to Route 9 to pick up the bus? That was my other question.
I thought it was addressed in our last meeting that you had talked to the superintendent.
And there will be front door school bus service at the 40B building.
yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, that's what I think, so
Yeah.
maybe if you just could repeat that, Mammy didn't hear you, I don't think.
Yes,
To
we-
the building. That's not what was said, I don't think.
Go ahead.
We spoke to this last time. We spoke with the school department, and they said that there will be school bus service to the 40B building once it's built. There will not be Route 9 pickup.
Oh, okay,
And
thank you.
they reviewed our turning radius analysis provided by Mr. Tatro, and they were satisfied that a 45-foot-long school bus will be able to
Yeah.
navigate the 40B building.
Right, so it sounds substantially solved.
Yes.
Thank you. Joyce Greenleaf, Chair of the Stewardship Committee. And as you know, the Stewardship Committee is responsible for managing Breakneck Hill Conservation Land, which abuts the proposed development. And I just want to take the opportunity to remind the zoning board of the points that we've been raising and most recently did in our letter of August 19th. And I would echo what Mimi shared, because the Stewardship Committee also has concerns about receiving a donation that we would then be responsible for managing if it's graded, denuded of trees and vegetation, and full of swales and drainage and whatnot. It would be more of a hazard. We're interested in land that can be habitat and open space and part of the conservation land. So we wouldn't want the responsibility as stewardship of taking that on. I also would say that stewardship has a vested interest in the vistas from Breakneck Hill across the property that's going to be developed. We wouldn't want to have an open view to Route 9 or to a massive building, and would care a lot about screening trees and shrubs that would protect those vistas, particularly to the proposed dog park and playground, which by my understanding would be pretty close to the conservation land trails. So as you know, we have a lot of expertise in stewardship on what kind of plants might be most appropriate for screening, and would be happy to advise on that, because we wouldn't want things to be planted that could then undermine the kinds of habitat and native plantings that we've been promoting for the conservation land. I'd also say we remain concerned about dark sky lighting. Without dark sky lighting, nighttime lighting can be very disruptive to wildlife, in particular fireflies, can confuse their life cycle. I think all of us remember happy childhood times of seeing lots of fireflies, and they're in a steep decline, and that without dark sky lighting, that can make that worse. Yeah, so we also have some other issues in the letter from August 19th, but these are the ones I wanted to, in particular, highlight so hopefully they'll be top of mind for the zoning board. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, James Tatro from Expedited Engineering again. I just wanted to touch on the Board of Health issue that Mimi raised. And early on in this process, we consulted with the Board of Health agent and asked what they wanted for information for their board. And I'd say it was like about a month back, we spoke again, and he asked if I would give him at least at that point a draft version of the plans that he could introduce it to his board and have them get up to speed on what this sort of thing was. Obviously, it's any system over 2,000 gallons is a pressure dose system. It's not just the standard system that everybody has in their backyard in town. And so he's had that for a couple weeks now, and we've agreed that, if any objections he has, please send them along to me. I don't think they've objected to any aspect of it yet. It's pretty straightforward, such as it is, but we have had conversations with them for a while now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so there's been several meetings where people have touched on the building height, and to be fair, you've gone from 6 down to 5. We talked about it being setback, but as I mentioned previously, we know we have to talk about this at some point. So I don't know if you have anything you wanted to just say about why it needs to be 5 to work in this spot.
Yep. Forgive me, because it's going to sound like a broken record, but I'd love to recap our position.
Sure.
That's okay. This hearing opened on December 13th of 2023, and you may remember me saying that I was pleased to introduce the Alexandra, which we felt was the perfect building in the perfect location. And by perfect location, we still feel this is very unique because it has no residential abutters, is essentially surrounded by office buildings, and then open woods and a greenhouse. And that's unique compared to other applications before you at this time, other applications that have recently been concluded. So it's a unique site. For many months, the discussion was about it being on the hill and the importance of the conservation land that was promised by a prior owner of the property in 2019. And so we went through that period in late winter, really into early summer, where the building was redesigned to come off the hill. And that was to preserve the conservation land. And with that, it went from sort of a shorter apartment building to one that's slightly taller. And that was to preserve the unit yield of 60 units. You guys know it better than anybody. The town, according to the last SHI, is 77 units short of being in safe harbor under Chapter 40B. And so with this proposed 60 units of rental apartments, you're only going to be 17, the town will be 17 units away from safe harbor. But at the moment, the town is exposed in that way. So that's part of why the yield should matter to the town, not just to the applicant. We, with what's before you now, have been able to preserve the conservation donation because of how we've redesigned the lot. You've taken input from the Southborough Fire Department. That would be one of the major sources of concern, and they did not raise any concern about the building's height in terms of the ability of their apparatus to address and provide public safety to a 5-story building. Similarly, we know that mutual aid from a city like Framingham, for example, would more than adequately provide additional apparatus that could reach a 5-story building. You were able to see the balloon test that we conducted, which more than anything was designed to address height and demonstrate height. And there seem not to be concerns that came from that. You saw, like we kind of said from the beginning, or once the building was lowered down to the existing parking lot, about how the 5-story building is shielded because of the office buildings that are in the foreground between Reservoir or Route 9 and where this building will be. And then the meeting a couple weeks ago, you heard from our architect, Monty French, who walked you through his really thoughtful design about making 5 stories work architecturally and more than that, visually. So yes, it may be a 5-story building, but it's designed not to look as large. And a big function of that, more than anything, was the penthouse, which you'll remember is not the full length width of the other floors, but is brought in, again, to reduce the massing, Monty would say, that you're seeing, and also, the materials used on the side of the building. So we think the applicant has done really all that it can to still achieve the yield, but really minimize 5-story building as much as it can in this location.
Thank you. All right. I'd actually be interested in how our board members feel.
I've thought about this a lot, and I actually pretty much agree with everything that he just said. I know the town, people hear 5-story building and they get freaked out, and I personally, and I think this board is, if we approve this, would not be saying go build 5-story buildings everywhere in Southborough. It's cool now. But I do think the location of this particular building, after seeing the balloon test, for me, that the fact that the ingress and egress is off of Route 9 and not affecting smaller streets around it, like we have with some other developments, affecting like Flag and Deerfoot and such, I do think it's a good spot to put a building, if we can work all the other details out that we've already discussed. And to me, the 5 stories is not going to be a deal breaker on my end. Like I said, that doesn't mean, oh, great, let's get 100 more applications of 5-story buildings. I don't want to set that precedent. I think this is a unique spot where the 5 stories would work. That's how I feel about it.
Thank you. Doris?
Just to say something from a different angle. The applicant has been progressively working through the application, and I know from the onset that there was a concern in the town to bring it up to 5 stories. It's in a good location. I'm in agreement on that, but I do consider the conservation land a neighbor. We absolutely need to meet the minimum requirement. But as we've gone through the process, we've collectively kicked the can, or in my opinion, kicked the can on having this discussion we're having right now. So we've never really forced a design change, and maybe in the future, I'm going to look at being more progressive about addressing another, you should have never gone to 5, you had to go to 4. 4 would have been a no-brainer in my mind, but architecturally, it's set back. I did go out to the balloon test. I'd like it to be 4. We need the units. The land, very generous on what I thought was not even required by the current landowner to give that land to the town. So it's not an obstacle for me. The height's just not, at this point, it's not going to be an obstacle for me, because maybe I think I should have been more proactive in seeking a design months ago, because it's if I were re-engineering at the rate that you're re-engineering, I'd get frustrated. And we need the housing. And you're not, from the front side, you're not going to see it, but with real sensitivity for conservation, I use that land all the time to walk it, sight lines, screening. I'll be looking at that pretty closely.
Thank you. Doug?
So I would agree. I mean, again, we need to get to safe harbor. There are much worse sites in Southborough that could be much more impactful. And I would not want to condition and lose a whole story of units at this point, from my perspective. I don't agree with Doris. I mean, I could live with slightly less parking and have the building be 4 stories and grow, but that ship may have sailed, unless the applicant's willing to do that. And that was brought up by Paul Carter at one point too as well. So it's not, that has been brought up by the public too as well. I did walk Breakneck Hill during the balloon test. We use that a lot, Breakneck Hill. The good news is that there's 20 feet off the path before the rock wall's even there, which is the ownership line. You guys by the way, moving it off the hill was huge, I think. You also modified the septic field as well. And so it would be good to acknowledge, I don't think anyone's going to be thrilled about a 5-story building, but if there's going to be a 5-story building in Southborough, this is probably the best location, for it from my perspective. So anyways, yeah, but I would say I'm of the same mindset, which is the height is not a deal breaker for me at this point. But I think the applicant has done a lot for it. I prefer 4, yes, but not to stop this project, that's for sure.
When you go to the site with the downgrade on the slope, you get a little bit of a 4-story feel, and then bringing in the penthouses.
Yeah.
Maybe the coloration, I don't know if the architect has stepped out, or he's not in tonight, but the coloration of the exterior can do more blending, not to be so bold, and that's what architects do. So I think I had a side conversation with him at some point.
Yeah, no, that's a good point too. The 5th story is being set back. I think that might be something, not to be over prescriptive on a condition, but that is part of the solution here, how that 5th story does set back, which I think is important too, just from a design perspective, because it lessens the impact. But anyways, those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Paul?
I don't have a problem with the height. I think it's appropriate for the location. I'm actually surprised that the applicant, I understand the economics of things, and I'm surprised the applicant didn't request more density or has agreed to as little density as where we're at right now. And as far as a precedent goes, again, I deal with this all the time. Everything stands on its own merits, so it just depends on what the other factors and variables are of a site. And so I think this site is relatively the most appropriate for what we've seen or heard of for Southborough right now. So I'm okay with the density and the height.
All right, thank you. Mike?
Yeah, as a resident townie, grew up here, like you always, there's no good place. And if there is a good place, it's on Route 9. I really feel like this is kind of like the perfect location for this project. I don't disagree with that at all. I have very often and complete disagreements with my next door neighbor, Don Morris, about Route 9 and development. But those are all fun and good conversations, even if we totally walk away thinking the other person's nuts. But that's okay, because he's an awesome neighbor and we love him. But no, I have no objections whatsoever to this.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm basically at the same point as the rest of the board. I don't see it as a problem, based on the location of it. I was at the balloon test. I went up on the hill as well. It's hard to see it from the Route 9 side with the building in front of it.
That's it.
And I'm just going to echo real quickly Paul's comments about precedent, because I think people have concerns about precedent, or they raise them. We've brought this up a number of times. There is no precedent. We could approve 5, and we could never approve another 5-story building ever again. And there's no leverage to say you have to. So I don't buy that argument. So yeah, this is where I stand on it. I don't know if we have anybody from the public who wants to chime in on the height.
I have no hands raised on Zoom.
No hands raised, okay. So there were 2 things that I asked Mr. Tellerman to look into a little bit further after last meeting for this meeting tonight. One of them is on the subdivision plan. Jay, your opinion on that? Because it's been brought up a number of times saying you got to have one. You have an opinion on the ZBA having the authority here, so I'll let you speak to that.
Well, we definitely do need a subdivision plan. So we definitely do need a subdivision plan. So I think in the pretty simple, just what the board is going to endorse ultimately here, I think is pretty important that we get that in the record. It should be pretty routine. The question of whether or not a zoning board has the authority to act as the planning board or any other entity in the subdivision process has been resolved for 40 years. In 1974, the Mahoney versus Board of Appeals of Winchester case went before the Supreme Judicial Court, and the court underscored, this is just 5 years after 40B came in, and said, no, you absolutely have that authority. There's been other challenges since using different theories. None of those have prevailed. So there's a number of Housing Appeals Committee cases and trial court cases that have tested that, and with some other arguments, and they have not prevailed. And there are dozens and dozens of Housing Appeals Committee cases that have underscored the authority of the board to act as the planning board in issuing subdivisions. There's another subdivision issue here too, and I think we spoke about this at the first time we were here, at probably the second time we were here, and every time since, and I've offered some opinions on that. To put a fine point on it, that second issue is, can we use the subdivision process, which this board has the authority, and cleave off, so to speak, a lot that will be used for 40B, leaving a different lot, the office park lot, and so we're essentially making changes to that lot. And it's a really interesting question, because there is some logic to the notion, like, how can you use 40B to change another lot that is not part of the 40B process? And I've opined that, based on Mahoney and some other cases, that the board can do that. The only thing they could not do is grant any waivers with respect to the office park lot. They can't use 40B to help that lot if the division created a new nonconformity over there. And in fact, this process did result in some squeezing of the parking there, and the applicant duly noted, I think, or acknowledged that 40B couldn't be a cure to that, and they applied for a variance. In the case of Taylor Cove versus the Andover Zoning Board of Appeals, and it's a 2009 case, the Housing Appeals Committee addressed this issue where you could, in that case, they weren't creating a new subdivision, which we know the board can do. They were modifying an existing one where rights and lots already existed by changing that subdivision to allow a 40B to happen on one of its lots, thereby essentially affecting all of the other lots. And there were many lots in that one. And the Housing Appeals Committee said quite clearly that the board could, and that the modification, even though it could impact those lots, that didn't mean it wasn't within the authority of the zoning board acting as the planning board to issue that modification. In other words, if the planning board could issue that modification, potentially the zoning board can too, even if there are other lots shown on that plan that are affected by it. And they underscored the premise, no one is being deprived of process here, the right to appeal, the right to participate. So that was an additional kind of set of circumstances that the Housing Appeals Committee addressed. There aren't a ton of cases on this issue, but when you piece together all of the various cases, including this Taylor Cove case, which I think was even more significantly affecting a potential rights of others to do it. In fact, the folks who were opposed to it in that case were suggesting that it would mar or have an impact on the title to all of those other properties, or raise questions of what we call infectious invalidity, where you do something under zoning that impacts negatively from a zoning perspective other lots. And the Housing Appeals Committee, even though they're not the final voice on this case wasn't further appealed, but they would be a voice here that I have to be responsive to. So they said, and I think it's quite right, and Mike could probably comment on this too, it's more his field than mine, that this isn't causing any jeopardy to the title they here, same person owns both properties, so they're going into it eyes wide open. But if they weren't, let's say there was another lot that was affected here, that we were doing another office lot that was affected, we're not impacting their title, the marketability of their title either. So all told, it's an awkward thing. I don't think the framers of Chapter 40B ever thought that these kind of nuances would get litigated, but they have been litigated. And it, both on kind of the policy perspective under 40B, love it or hate it, and it's not awesome sometimes to work with if you're a municipality, clearly. It touches everything we're doing here, we find support for in the 40B statute. So I hope that's helpful. There was an additional question as to how we could create a lot here, I think potentially 2 lots that don't have any frontage on a way.
Yeah, that was the other thing I wanted to ask you.
That's the zoning waiver part. So that has nothing to do with subdivision per se. That has to do with us being able to waive frontage requirements under zoning. So it's kind of a part of it. They're connected, but we can do that. Waive it right down to 0.
Right, and that's really the bottom line.
Which
We have
is-
the authority to waive it
Yes,
down to 0, yeah.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about the driveway, in your opinion on this, Attorney Tollerman. There was feedback in the last meeting, probably in the meeting before. We have the authority to waive, but, excuse me if I'm incorrect, but Meme, I think it is, had said that we cannot waive it under Mass General Law. Am I saying that correctly? We cannot waive frontage to 0?
But, I mean, that's exactly what I asked Jay to address.
So you said we can.
You 100% can
100% can.
waive frontage
Right,
to 0.
Okay, so that's,
So you have to create, so the original
no, I just
thought.
want the answer. It's,
Right.
yeah, there was a difference of opinion, so the bottom.
Right.
Make sure I got the answer right.
Yeah, the original thought here was that they would divide these lots up through the approval not required process, which the board could also do. But the statute there requires, we can't waive statutes, we can only waive bylaws. The statute there requires
I see. Okay.
20 feet of frontage for every lot created through an approval not required. So what the applicant did in that instance is said, well, we'll just do it through subdivision control, which the board has authority over, where even if there was a local requirement in the regulations or otherwise to conform, to have conforming lots, this whole process, the 40B process, gives you relief from that, or it gives you the ability to give relief from that.
Okay. Thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, it's
Very
clear as mud. I mean, I've been
Mud
dealing
isn't
with this
clear.
statute for
The mud's not clear.
like 28, 29 years, and there's always new issues that arise. It is probably in need of some amount of overhaul.
Okay.
So who owns the road? It's not a road, it's a driveway. Who owns the driveway?
Well,
I mean, I think,
there's going to be, I'm assuming there's going to be cross easements to use the
Thank you.
property
That's what we discussed easements, so
Right.
we saw through easements.
that
so
should,
that they can get out to Route 9.
Right.
Right. And that'll be a condition, those will probably should be shown on a plan if they're not already as an easement area, and that we would require a condition that we get to review the easements as to form to make sure, that would be a post-permit requirement that they draft all those easements up.
Sounds good.
okay.
All right.
All right, so we have no hands up, right? So let's get back to what you wanted to raise, which is we're to continue to November 13th, because we already have something scheduled then.
Yes.
But we also, we need to get something in writing on this, don't we, for the extension?
They stated that they'd get that over to Laura tomorrow.
Okay.
I did.
Okay,
Excuse me.
all right. Okay, so, I don't know why I don't remember this every time. Did we vote on that?
You should,
We should.
you should, you absolutely should.
Yes, okay, Paul knows.
So I'll make a motion to extend the public hearing to the October the 13th.
I'll second it.
All right. Motion to
November.
continue
I got lost track of what month we're in.
motion to continue the meeting to November 13th, 2024 has been made and seconded. All in favor, respond with aye. Opposed, nay. Paul, unfortunately, you're Mullins out of this.
Mulligan.
Doug?
Aye.
Jamie?
I'll say aye, but I may not be here depending on my schedule,
Okay.
so.
Doris?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Williams? Aye. All right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
So we have on the agenda for tonight, all we have the meeting minutes for two
Did
meetings,
you
right?
just do minutes, right?
Yeah. I had some very minor things in there that I wish I had sent them to you before now, because now I'm going to be
See you,
sweating.
Lou.
Thanks, Lou.
Thank you.
Oh, Smiley smiles.
Oh, my God.
See you, Mimi. I'll see you on the 4th
That's a long meeting.
for the ADU. Yeah, awesome. Yeah. I'm going to be at that symposium tomorrow, so. I'm working on 4 different towns as well. So like Holliston, Hopkinton, so Franklin. I got to get through the end of the month for just my business, but literally I was reviewing the revisions today.
David, I have to go to
So
ladies'
Laura
room,
sent
so
me
we have to
those.
take a 2-minute break. That's
Okay.
I know we have to do the.
We're taking a 3-minute break.
get this over.
Okay, we are back.
We heard the gavel.
We are back in session.
Bye, Jay, thank you.
So our agenda items, the first ones are, we have two separate meetings with minutes we need to approve of tonight. Did anybody, I can't find it right now. I find some minor things in here, very minor, that if I don't find them, I think we can live without. But I'm just giving the board the opportunity. Any concerns with the minutes? Sorry, let's talk about the first ones are
As in, September 20th.
September 20th, and that would
So
have been.
Jamie and Paul will not.
Jamie and Paul are not part of this. This was when we met regarding the decision on Park Central.
No comments on my part.
No comments, okay. Doris, any concerns?
No concerns.
Okay. Mike?
Yeah.
Mike, again, in the old days, you would just print it out and you would circle what the problem is. It was something really minor, like they, or whatever. And you got the idea.
Probably.
So I would say, considering the level of detail in the minutes, I don't have a problem with the minutes as written. So I will take a motion on that.
Making to accept the minutes as drafted.
Second.
All right, motion to accept the minutes as drafted for September 20th, 2024 has been made and seconded. All in favor, respond with aye, opposed nay. Doug?
Aye.
Doris?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Williams, aye. Okay, thank you. So the second one is that?
October
8th, okay. And same thing, this was, we talked about, is that where we had, we had 104 Sears Road, the special permit with the garage. Nothing really substantial on 250. And then we did talk a lot about 120. The architect presented, they kind of went through some of the things that needed to be addressed. It was actually, some of the stuff is still, to me, kind of fresh from tonight. Again, I had no concerns with the minutes as written, but looking for the board to weigh in. Doug?
No concerns.
Jamie? No concerns. Doris? No concerns. Mike?
No.
All right, I had none either. Again, maybe something really just so minor. So we'll take a motion on the minutes for October 8th, 2024.
Make
The motion to accept the minutes for October 8th, 2024.
second.
All right, motion has been made to accept the minutes as written for October 8th, 2024. All in favor, respond with aye, opposed nay. Doug?
Aye.
Jamie?
Aye.
Doris?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Williams, aye. Okay, so what else did we have? We just had upcoming meetings?
Yeah, so we just have November 13th, we have a special permit application, we have a special permit and variance application, we have 250 Turnpike 40B that's scheduled. I don't have any plans on that, so I'm not sure
Yeah,
if
that-
there's going to be any.
There might not be a lot to talk about for 250. You can't be certain of that, but I think, it's the same applicant, and they're clearly going to be focused on how do we get 120 done. Obviously, we could tell from tonight, so.
Yeah, and then 120 Turnpike, which I'll schedule at the same time as 250. That way we don't have to wait. If there's nothing for 250, we don't have to sit around for 10 minutes. And then other than that, as of right now, it's just our regular meeting in December, which is December 18th. The filing deadline is Friday. As of right now, I don't have any applications, so hopefully it's a light one. I know there's been discussion of ADUs and the draft bylaw that Mimi had sent.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to add that to an upcoming agenda to discuss?
As soon as I get clear of my end of the month through this week, I'm probably gonna spend an inordinate amount of time on the ADUs.
Okay. Yeah, I don't mind adding it to the agenda with the proviso that, we do, I guess, a little homework, to look at what they've got. I don't know that I have a substantial problem with it, but Mike, I'm going to defer to you. This is clearly something right in your wheelhouse, so I would think it would make a lot of sense for, when you have something you feel like is of substance we can talk
I'm going
about.
to be speaking to people in Boston about this
Yeah,
tomorrow for
yeah.
the rest of the day. So,
Yeah, okay.
And then I have to do homework on 4 other towns as well, and then I'm going to circle back to Mimi on this. So I'll give you guys,
Yeah.
it's worth me writing up a report. What I've already started to do is amend some and make some comments to Mimi's amendment requests. And so I'm
Okay.
going to work on tightening that up, and I can just share it with the board.
Yeah, and I know that makes our agenda a little bit full, but the problem with this language is you've got to get it ready for town meeting, and there's already kind of a shrinking window.
That's just it.
The 3 of us were at the planning board meeting, and they talked about schedules, so unfortunately, we
I
don't
was
have,
really
we
impressed
don't have a
that
lot
they
of
got
luxury.
the amendment change over so quickly. Like, I was happy to see that.
Yeah.
I gave feedback,
Oh, microphone.
Sorry.
I gave the feedback to Laura, but Mike, dig in.
Microphone on? Yeah.
I have provided feedback to Laura for Mimi's memo. Mimi's memo was very preliminary, easy, short. But I did give some feedback based on how she treated it. I kind of kept it at that level, but we would probably want a lot more detail.
Okay.
Mike.
And then, so I'll add it, David, if it's okay with you, I'll just add it as like an update item
Yeah.
for November.
Update.
And
Yeah.
then, I know Mike is going to the planning board meeting on Monday. Is anybody else interested in going? Because I just need to know if I need to post
What
an
is
agenda.
There-
Monday, the 4th.
It's part 2 of like the same ADU meeting that we went to the last time. That's on Monday.
If I do, I need the remote. I can get that online, though. I'm probably going to chime in
I'll
remotely
probably.
down in Florida.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think I'll show up.
All right, so I'll post an agenda just to be
Definitely
safe.
post it. That way we're
Yeah,
covered.
because
Yeah.
I can get a link right off the main website.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And then if you don't have a quorum, just let me know. And
Right.
I just have to update the town clerk, so.
Okay,
Okay,
I'm going to
that's
actually
it.
put that on
That's all
my,
I've got.
that's it?
that's at 6:30,
Okay.
right?
Yes.
All right. Not-
We'd never be able to get.
I know.
Is it go
God.
time?
Paul, we miss you every
Go
time
time,
you're
Paul.
here.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Second?
Oh, motion to adjourn the meeting has been made and seconded. All in favor, respond with aye. Opposed, nay. Paul?
Aye.
Doug?
Aye.
Jamie?
Aye.
Doris?
Aye.
Mike? Aye. And Williams, aye. Thank you very much.